on multiple state and federal charges for an act of arson at Buffalo City Hall on Saturday night. You all saw this individual take an object that was on fire and throw that burning object on camera into a window in Buffalo City Hall, starting a fire. People throughout Buffalo, throughout Erie County, were absolutely outraged watching that occur and play out live on TV. The outrage was so great, there were multiple tips from many places that came into law enforcement. I want to recognize the work of the Buffalo Police Department in processing those tips and going out and making the arrest of 20-year-old Cortland Renford on multiple state and federal charges. It is important to note that all of us here respect peaceful protests. We support the right of citizens to peacefully protest, to assemble, to use their free speech. But we will not tolerate in this community anyone who commits acts of violence, vandalism, or criminality in the name of peaceful protest. So again, I thank the Buffalo Police Department and all of those that came forward with tips leading to this arrest being made so quickly. It's now my pleasure to introduce the U.S. Attorney for the Western District, J.P. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor Brown, and thank you for your leadership throughout the events of the recent days. And as the mayor said, this afternoon, a federal criminal complaint was lodged against Cortland Renford, age 20, of Buffalo, New York, charging him with destroying and attempting to destroy a building used in interstate commerce, and that is City Hall, for his actions on the evening of May 30th. In the event of conviction on the charge contained in that criminal complaint, Mr. Renford faces a mandatory minimum term of imprisonment of 5 years and up to 40 years imprisonment, along with a $1 million fine. Obviously, these are very serious charges, and I can tell you that on Saturday I was on a rooftop in a building down here, and I witnessed some of the events, including not directly but via television, the conduct of Mr. Renford and other individuals. And frankly, I was very disturbed by what I saw. I've been a prosecutor for about 30 years now, almost, and during that time, I've learned that much of the violence in our community is rooted in feelings of powerlessness. Violent school shooters and workplace shooters seek to exact revenge for some perceived injustice that might be done to them. Violent drug dealers, violent terrorists, without any real direction or purpose in life, seek to find meaning in what they do and a sense of community by joining a gang or a terrorist organization. And violent protesters, such as those in Buffalo this past weekend, who seek to vindicate an apparent murder by committing assault, arsons, and acts of violence. Each of these people, the school and workplace shooters, drug dealers, terrorists, and rioters, share one attribute, and that is that they seek to use violence and aggression as a means of self-empowerment. Yet using violence as a means of empowerment is contrary to who we are as Americans. As Americans, our power is derived not from the amount of violence we are capable of committing. Instead, as Americans, our power comes directly from what we believe in and the values that we choose to uphold. Those aspirational values which define us as Americans are set forth in documents like our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, and they include things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, things like equality, and things like justice. It was this very notion of self-empowerment and self-governance that our founding fathers placed their trust in. In America, our power does not come from a uniform or a title. In America, our power does not come from a gun. In America, our power does not come from the amount of money we have. In America, our power does not come from our ability to commit violence or destruction. And in America, our power does not come from the color of our skin. In America, our power comes from within each one of us. In America, our power comes from our willingness as citizens to live up to those aspirational values set forth in our founding documents. When we fall short of those values, and when we fail to regulate our own behavior, as the Minneapolis police did in Mr. Floyd's case, or as Mr. Renford did here, then we give up our power. And it falls upon the state to intervene and to use the rule of law, as we are doing today, to substitute for the rule of self. For that is the role of government in our criminal justice system, to use the rule of law to enforce compliance with our shared values when our self-governance fails. So my message to the public is, the choice is yours. You can assert your power by engaging in self-governance and acting in furtherance of those shared values which together define us as Americans. As the mayor said, whether through peaceful protests or thoughtful conversations and the free exchange of ideas, we can enhance our power by using the tools given to us in our Constitution, things like the right to free speech, the right to assembly, as we continue our relentless and never-ending quest to form a more perfect union. Or you can simply give away your power by pursuing a self-serving and self-defeating agenda, which includes violence and insurrection. If you do that, you will end up in jail or worse. As I said, the choice is yours. I'd like to echo the mayor's recognition of the Buffalo Police Department and the tremendous work they've done over these past few days, working in partnership with really every local police department, the state police, the Erie County Sheriff's Department, all our federal partners. I can tell you that I was overwhelmed by the show of support by law enforcement for our community in responding to the protests this weekend, and they will remain vigilant as we do our best to work together to uphold the rule of law, and as I said, to build a more perfect union, which is what our objective is. So with that, I'm going to turn it over back to the mayor, or to District Attorney Flynn. Okay, District Attorney John Flynn, my tremendous partner. I'd like to thank him too, as you will hear, we've been in communication throughout this weekend discussing where we can bring the best charges against individuals that break the law, and it's through that partnership that culminated in these charges filed both in state court and federal court today. So with that.
Thank you, JP. And again, let me thank the mayor as well and the Buffalo Police Department for the outstanding job that they have done over the past few days here to not only keep calm and order in our city and in our county, quite frankly, but the great investigative work that the Buffalo Police Department did along with our federal partners to make the apprehension and arrest of Mr. Renford. In addition to the federal charges, Mr. Renford was just arraigned about a half an hour ago by Judge Bowler on state charges as well. He was arraigned on arson in the third degree and criminal mischief. The arson in the third degree is a Class D nonviolent felon, Class C nonviolent felony under New York state law. The fact that Mr. Renford has a prior felony, if he is convicted of this charge or pleads guilty, has a conviction of this arson charge, he will be adjudicated as a second felony offender. That carries a maximum of 15 years on the state side, a minimum of 3 years. So obviously with both the state and federal charges, Mr. Renford is looking at some serious time here. And unfortunately, we have a 20-year-old young man who, like I said, already has a prior felony conviction and just did an incredibly dangerous and an incredibly stupid thing on Saturday night. As I mentioned yesterday, there were a number of arrests that were made in connection with the protest on Saturday evening. One of those was arraigned yesterday. Last night, there were a number of additional arrests that were made. 2 individuals were arraigned this morning. My office has provided you with the details on those. One was a reckless endangerment charge that involved a U-Haul truck. I know that there was a lot of social media yesterday that talked about U-Haul trucks and individuals who were perhaps shooting out of U-Haul trucks. 99% of those social media posts were inaccurate and false. Right now, there is only 1 charge and 1 arrest made regarding a U-Haul truck that had nothing to do at this time with any shooting. It involved basically a reckless endangerment charge. There was also a graffiti charge that was charged as criminal mischief, where the individual allegedly put graffiti on the Elmwood Avenue side of City Hall. That individual was also arraigned today by Judge Bowler. The rest of the arrests that were made last night, the overwhelming majority were curfew violations. They were given all appearance tickets, and they will come back in mid-July. So obviously we've had a busy weekend here in the city of Buffalo, but again, I want to commend the Buffalo Police Department and all the local law enforcement agencies who have helped out here, that have done an outstanding job to keep our community safe and to limit the amount of violence and destruction that has occurred. So thank you, Mayor.
So again, 20-year-old Conrad Renford of Buffalo that we saw on Saturday night commit an arson on City Hall has been arrested with multiple state and federal charges. I want to say that it is not a pleasure for any of us, myself, U.S. Attorney Kennedy, District Attorney Flynn, to see a 20-year-old member of our community in this position charged with these crimes. I encourage other young people in this community, as you express your anger, as you express your pain, as you peacefully protest, make sure that your protests are peaceful. Like U.S. Attorney Kennedy and District Attorney Flynn, I want to thank law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels, the Buffalo Police Department, for their extraordinary work in keeping our community safe the last few days. And on behalf of the people of Buffalo, I want to thank U.S. Attorney Kennedy and District Attorney Flynn for their great partnership. Now, I want to just recognize that we are here with Captain Jeff Rinaldo, Police Commissioner Byron Lockwood's Chief of Staff, and we are all now available for the media's questions.
There have been a bunch of questions about whether or not there were outside agitators involved in this. Is this an incident where somebody was motivated or assisted or encouraged in some form or fashion or had an accomplice in some form or fashion that was an outside agitator?
I will say generally, we know from law enforcement information that there were outside agitators. We know from members of this community, those that are community activists, those that are in the faith-based community, that some that participated in the protest here on Saturday were from outside this community. I will let Captain Rinaldo speak more to the specifics.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor stated, we had a lot of intelligence that came in about the chance of, and unfortunately we saw that outside influences arrived in Buffalo and agitated the crowd. There are professionally organized groups that do travel to protests, and they attempt to turn what starts off as a peaceful exercise of your First Amendment rights. All it takes in a mob is a brick, the first rock, the first window broken, and unfortunately sometimes a mob mentality can take over. And we definitely saw that here on Saturday. Thankfully, we only saw it on Saturday.
But did we see it in connection with this particular crime?
You know, Steve, the investigation's still continuing to figure out who he may have been in conjunction with, so I can't comment on that right now. Charges could be brought if that is determined to be true, from anybody else that also did or took an action to incite a riot or to incite damage on the building.
But he's been questioned to that effect, correct?
No, I can't comment on what he's been questioned to or what statements he's made
And
at
Mr.
this point.
Renford is a City of Buffalo resident?
Yes, he's a resident of Auburn Street in the city of Buffalo.
I've
Mayor,
heard
it's
two
not
different
fair.
names.
The gentleman would like to comment on that.
Mr. Kennedy, we've heard two different names. Could we get the correct pronunciation and spelling of this young man's first and last name?
His name is
please?
Cortland Renford, Renford, first name Cortland, Courtland.
Thank you.
of Auburn Street in Buffalo. I'd just like to add, as to this weekend, we had a number of calls with our main Justice Department in Washington. Attorney General Barr reached out, and we've mobilized our JTTF, our Joint Terrorism Task Force, to be a conduit for information along the lines of the question in USD, to identify, to use those sources, mining, scrubbing social media and other sources, to attempt to identify the individuals that are behind these organized protests, or the organization behind some of these more violent protesters. And so we've deployed that. They're interfacing with local law enforcement daily, continuously, I should say, and we're trying to build our database, so to speak, in terms of identifying the individuals and the links, and analyzing the connections that seem to be sort of developing sort of across the country involving some of these individuals. So that's an ongoing investigation. It certainly would be a basis for additional federal charges if people travel across state lines for purposes of, inciting riots and that sort of thing. So it's something that we're using an intelligence-based system to try and identify those individuals that are behind sort of these types of activities.
Would you say you're making progress towards those identifications?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just, it's again, I think, again, as I think has been said by others, we're fortunate that, for as bad as it was here, it's been worse in other places. And I think part of that is because of, the tremendous cooperative federal, state, and local law enforcement. We know each other, we talk to each other regularly, we share information, and some of that information sharing obviously led to a quick arrest here. That, in fact, that also happened to be on videotape helped too. But I mean, there's certainly this information sharing is going on extensively, and it's only been ramped up. And I mean, it's something that's done sort of in the background every day in the field of counterterrorism, but it's now being used. The model, at least, not necessarily the same databases and everything, but the model is being used to share information and to work with local law enforcement so that, when people are arrested, social media can be exploited, electronic devices can be exploited, find out who the common individuals are, and that's what we're going to do. So if people are going to engage in this behavior, beware, because we're going to use every law enforcement tool that we have to try and identify them and bring them to justice.
Gentlemen, on that note, in addition to the City Hall arson that we saw, the bail bonds van was set ablaze, are there any leads or tips as to who may have started that one?
Which one?
The bail bonds van that was usually parked outside the City
yeah.
Court, that one up in flames instead of any leads on that one?
That's still being investigated as well as a Tonawanda SWAT van was also destroyed as well, so that's being investigated. Steve, the answer to your question is two parts, all right? The first part is what perhaps brought him there in the first place. So that is what, Captain Ronaldo and JP are talking about as far as investigating, who might have brought him there, what might have encouraged him to go there in the first place. Now, whether or not anyone told him specifically, hey, and you saw it on video, pick up that box that was burning there on the ground and throw that in the City Hall window, okay? I mean, to be fair to the kid, it doesn't appear that anyone told him to do that, all right? I mean, it appeared from the video that there was a burning box that was laying on the ground there, and he went and picked that up and then threw it in the City Hall window there. So I think you got to separate the two out as to what may have brought him there in the first place and what he actually did there when his adrenaline was flowing.
Can you go over the time he's looking at there? It was 5 years minimum.
Yeah, he's got about his minimum's 3 years, and the maximum's 15 years on my end. Now on the federal end, it's different. He would have had, like I said though, he's got a prior felony. So if he didn't have the prior felony, then his minimum would have been 1 day in jail. So he went from 1 day in jail to 3 years by having the prior felony. The maximum stays the same.
Hey, Mayor, do you plan to have a curfew tonight in the city?
We have not heard from law enforcement that there is a curfew tonight, that there is a need for a curfew tonight. I know that County Executive Polenkars had his news briefing not long ago, and he is not going to be calling an Erie countywide curfew. And based on my conversations with Commissioner Lockwood and his management team, I will not be calling a curfew for the city of Buffalo.
What about anything on the pawn shop incident about the 13 guns possibly being stolen or anything like that?
I've spoken with the SAC, the special agent in charge for the ATF, John DeVito, down in New York, and that is actively being investigated as we speak. And it's obviously a matter of great interest federally, and we're working that to ground, every lead that we have in it. So that investigation is ongoing.
Patrick Ronaldo, can you tell us a little bit about the assault of the woman in front of the federal courthouse and whether or not she attempted to use her car as a weapon when she ran into people?
Sure. So, as I'm sure everybody saw, a car was able to bypass a traffic checkpoint that was at Delaware and Mohawk, and it wound up in front of the federal courthouse. The driver of that vehicle was dragged out of the car by protesters. She sustained serious injuries. Our quick reaction force with the Buffalo Police Department, as well as the Homeland Security and Marshal Service, was able to go out and rescue her, bring her into safety. At this time, she does not wish to be a cooperating witness in that investigation. We are still working to determine whether or not her actions at the start arose to the level of a criminal charge we placed against her. We are currently reviewing our video surveillance footage to determine exactly how the car got into that area, how it got into where the crowd was. It was right in the middle of a very heated part of that protest. Some officers did have to get removed from the traffic checkpoints for their safety, and we believe that the vehicle was just able to drive, unfortunately, around the stationary police car and entered the crowd area.
So some people are telling us that she was providing things to other protesters to throw at police, glass bottles and things. They were peaceful protesters trying to get her to stop, and that's when she became agitated and hit the gas. Do you have any indication of what she was doing there?
You know, we do not at this time. We've had some people contact our confidential tip line and provide some information, but at this point I'm just not at liberty to discuss exactly what her intentions were.
Would someone just be able to talk about why you collaborate in situations like this? Is it to get the most charges, or what is your collaboration efforts like?
Well, we do it so that we can uphold our oath of, upholding the rule of law and bringing people to justice as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And, we aren't the Department of Convictions, we are the Department of Justice. And, part of what we're trying to achieve here is justice. It's not about convicting people, but it's about, protecting the community, protecting our city hall, protecting the people that are there, the things that are there, and really to send a message that we are unified, and as the mayor said, and as the district attorney said, unified in sort of our understanding of the peaceful protests and the appropriateness of that, and we share that understanding, and we share that consensus that it is appropriate to do this. But when you cross the line, then there's going to be consequences, and if you cross the line, and if you try sort of, as I said earlier in my comments, in terms of giving up your ability to govern your own behavior and control yourself, then we're going to do it for you, and that's what we did. And I mean, the importance here is because basically it's mayhem out there, and we need information and data from whatever source we can have, and everybody has a piece of something, and it's only when we can sort of put it together collectively that we're able to actually build the cases, because we have, as the prosecutors, both the district attorney and I, we carry the burden of proof. It's our, we've seen this weekend, it's easy to break stuff down, but it's hard to put things together. And so when we do that with a case, we have to put a case together, put charges together. We need to develop our evidence and build our case, pardon the pun, brick by brick, so that we can, have something that will withstand a trial and carry our burden. So that's, we do it because it's our jobs, it's the oath we took, and because it's the best way to do what we need to do.
One or two more if they have them. Anything else?
What's the status of the woman who was driving the car? She sustained serious injuries. How is she doing now?
It's my understanding that she's still in stable condition at ECMC.
Hey JP, what would the charges be on the federal, what would the sentence be on the federal level then? I know that...
It's a 5-year mandatory minimum up to 20 years in prison. So 5 to 20.
Anything else? We all good? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mayor.
And you have been watching a live update with city officials talking about the protests in Buffalo over the weekend, getting some clarification on a number of things that happened and updates as well on the arrests stemming from those protests, including now the name of the person wanted in connection with starting the fire at City Hall. Officials say he's 20-year-old Cortland Renford of Buffalo, and he's now facing state and federal charges, including arson charges. So some updates there, but